Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. It's time for the July Q&A. We've got quite a few questions actually. Tim sorted all the questions this month, so I haven't actually seen them, but it looks like you've got a lot there, Tim. There's some good ones.
Oh, there's always good ones. I think we'll try a few different things with this Q&A section. I think we're going to do at least attempt a rapid fire Q&A to get through some of those questions that maybe don't deserve or warrant like a full answer, but are worth covering anyway. So yeah, we'll get into that a bit later on in the episode and see how that goes. But just trying to spice it up a little bit, you know. Got to try a few different things here with the Q&As. Keep us interested.
You're not trying to stop me from rambling, are you, Tim?
Yeah, that's it, actually. That's definitely it. You caught me out on that one.
I'm to you pretty quickly there. All right, well, let's get into them. All right, first question here. Has the PC market got any plans for competing with the new console's custom decompression chips? What I've heard is it would take a 3700X to do the same work as those custom chips. Okay, Tim.
Yeah,
you're the resident console expert.
That. Yeah, I mean, consoles always try to do interesting things with their hardware, add in special chips to do certain things. So I think maybe not initially. I don't think the storage requirements of games will be that high as we go through the console transition period where games are still, developed to also run on the older consoles. But over time, we might see something like that. Maybe not integrated into a CPU, but maybe into the SSD itself. It's not really clear exactly how this solution is integrated into these consoles. So we'll have to wait and see more around the architecture and how everything works there. But I think that if it becomes a significant requirement for games, that the PC will have to do something and that we will see something like that. And it could, if they do end up integrating like a decompression acceleration into the CPU, could have benefits in other areas as well. So it'd be an interesting path for chip makers to go down, I think. Next question, will the lesser cache sizes of the new Ryzen APUs compared to the traditional Zen 2 CPUs have an impact on performance in the future perhaps, or are the larger cache sizes mainly to make up for the Infinity Fabric latency on the Zen 2 chips? So what have you seen in your testing so far?
Well, I'll address the whole future thing, perhaps. I don't think it will have any impact on future performance, or probably won't. Again, we haven't even tested these CPUs at all, so it's hard to comment on them, but generally that sort of stuff doesn't influence future performance in the way that more cores will, for example. So if you compare, one of the new APUs with a very similar Zen 2 based desktop CPU, and they deliver a similar Cinebench score, and the current gaming performance is very similar, then I think it stands to reason that down the track they will still deliver very similar application and gaming performance. What do you reckon, Tim?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's really the question here is, how is that going to affect just performance between the two CPUs, not necessarily more about what's going to happen in the future or that sort of thing. There is a chance that having more cache is going to be more beneficial for things like gaming with the Zen 2 desktop line as opposed to the Zen 2 APUs. I guess I can't call it Zen 2 desktop line, can I? Zen 2 CPU desktop line as opposed to the APUs. But that's again something that we'll have to explore with benchmarking, see how that design differs.
I think there's just cons and pros to either design. But without benchmarking them, it's very hard to say.
All right, so next question is a bit of a long one, so we'll get through this. How do these leakers find the unreleased CPU and GPU scores so quickly, easily, and often? Are they simply PR guys handed the info for marketing purposes? Can the average person go there and see those values on the sites? Are they checking every 5 seconds? Are they insiders? You guys are smart and resourceful. Can you provide a little explanation to how they do it? So I think you're talking about when we see those leaks of like a 3D Mark score or Geekbench or one of those benchmarks where, it'll kind of have maybe Intel, undisclosed processor there and then some score and people try to work it out. I think generally you can, as an average person, just go see it. But I think these leakers, maybe they have Google alerts set up or they regularly search for known upcoming processor names or something like that just so that they get quick notifications on this. I wouldn't say, you'd agree with me on this, I'd say that I wouldn't say it's their PR people being handed the info. That seems pretty unlikely.
Yeah, that would be a very rare instance. I think for the vast majority, that's not it. I mean, of course, some of them are made up and aren't legitimate, but if they are on a public listing that We used to see it for Assassin's Creed. No, not Assassin's Creed. Ashes of the benchmark.
Yeah, that's right.
That used games like that. So yeah, I think they would have some sort of alert set up, and they'd probably just scroll through it every now and then, and that's what they're interested in spending their time doing, looking for that kind of stuff, getting hints of new upcoming things. They'd obviously have a good idea of when that stuff will be in the testing phase, so they can find it. So they'd have all those alerts set up for all those different lists, and yeah. It's nothing else to it, really. Do you think we'll get a new SATA, so SATA 4, potentially, to match M.2 speeds? So my answer to this one would be definitely no. You the same, Tim?
Yeah, I'd say no. It seems like we're moving more towards M.2 as a SSD interface. And for SATA, it's kind of hard drives, that sort of thing. And, SATA SSDs these days, especially with QLC coming more into the market, tends to be the sort of slower, less performance-intensive SSDs that still are fine on a SATA connection. So I wouldn't see much need for another SATA version. A lot of motherboards these days have plenty of M.2 slots, 2-3 slots, which is fine for most people. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely the legacy connection now. And, of course, SATA was introduced well before SSDs, and it was designed for hard drives. So it's not optimal for SSDs, where the PCIe Express link is much more beneficial for NVMe SSDs, direct link to the CPU, high bandwidth, lower latency. So it just makes much more sense for high speed devices such as SSDs. So I don't think we'll see SATA evolve beyond this point. I think it'll just remain as it is until it eventually gets phased out, like what we saw with parallel ports and things like that.
Yep.
IDE. All right, question here for Tim, I think.
All right.
Do you think AMD will try to maintain the pricing for the RDNA 2 GPUs? And what do you think about Nvidia's pricing strategy for Ampere?
So again, crystal ball type stuff. So I think, we don't have any pricing information for either of these chips right now. So this is all just guesswork, I guess. On Nvidia's, I think both companies right now, we're talking a little bit about this in the live stream, keeping their cards very close to their chest, not really releasing too much in the way of news or anything relating to upcoming GPUs. We haven't really heard anything from either of these companies, and the launch doesn't seem that far away. So I think it's kind of like the consoles as well. It's going to be a price battle between the two, and whoever jumps first is potentially going to be making a mistake, because if they come in too high, then the other company can come in and undercut them quite easily. And you might even see something like with the 5700 series launch, where AMD adjusted the pricing after they first announced it. Like they announced it one price and they lowered it a little bit.
I think with every launch they adjusted something, but yeah, the 5700 series, I'm pretty certain that there was an adjustment made there.
Yeah, so I think we'll see a bit of that happening. I would still expect that both companies will try and price their parts as aggressively as they can. So maybe Nvidia's still going to target an expensive price, and AMD might focus more on the mid-range pricing. But again, with this launch, there's just so much going on. It's hard to sort of pinpoint and say exactly what's happening, because we really don't know. There's just it seems like a big overhaul on both sides, so that's going to create a lot of unique things to go through. So we'll have to wait and see in the coming months.
Do AMD CPUs work better with AMD GPUs? I've seen this one asked throughout the ages, and no, it doesn't really matter. They're all fully compatible, whether it's Intel CPUs with AMD or Nvidia. There isn't one that works better, well, depending on the product. But no, that's not really a thing. Anything to add to that, Tim?
No, I think it wasn't around the original launch of Ryzen that people were at least questioning whether, there was some, I don't know what you'd call it, but issue with NVIDIA GPUs on AMD Ryzen CPUs on drivers or whatever. But I think at this point, that's not really, there's nothing relating to that anymore.
There's been bugs and things like that, and there can be driver overhead issues that cause a bit more of a performance penalty on certain platforms, but realistically speaking, no. There's and as for Ryzen CPUs working better with something like the 5700 XT opposed to the 2060 Super, not a thing. So.
Yep. Okay, this is one that's been a bit of a hot topic over the last couple of weeks. Are you excited about AMD's 4000G for, I assume this is a rumored price of $300? Initial benchmarks suggest the iGPU has a GTX 950 performance, which is better than a 750 Ti, which was a gaming beast not too long ago. So
not too long ago.
Well, I'm not sure whether that was ever a gaming beast, but
it was good value many years ago now.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's the 4700G they're talking about there. But sorry, go on, Tim.
Well, I was just interested in your thoughts. I mean, you're going to be probably coming up to benchmark these soon, whether that's in a system or in the...
Well, we hope.
Hope so.
We hope. That is certainly the hope. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about testing them out. I mean, I'm generally excited about any truly new hardware. And yeah, I can't really say too much more about that. I'm excited. How well they perform and all that is sort of yet to be seen, at least from our end. But if you can get sort of GTX 950 like performance, then yeah, that could be an interesting product. I'm not sure it'd make sense as a budget gaming sort of build, but again, that's all stuff we have to work out when we test them and look at price, performance, and do a full analysis that way.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting, just purely based on one being monolithic die and the other Zen 2 chips being the chiplet design, sort of seeing how that fares for latencies and the cache size being different. I think that'll be interesting. Next
question. Let's face it, Polaris was a major disappointment. Okay. RDNA 1 was plagued by driver issues. Do you think that RDNA 2 will be the Zen 2 moment for Radeon, or are we expecting too much? What are your thoughts on that, Tim?
I think the opening sentences of this are pretty harsh. Polaris, I think, has not been a major disappointment. Even today, you can get great value Polaris cards. Like, I guess if you're thinking high-end performance, right? Like, it wasn't a high-end
people
card.
were talking about, like, RX 480 being a GTX, 1080 killer or something crazy like that, which I think because AMD showed Crossfire 480s beating a 1080 in, like, what was it, Ashes of the Benchmark?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that's what they're talking about there, but obviously it didn't really compete at the high end, but it's been an excellent value, top pick, mid-range to sort of entry-level contender. So it's worked out quite well, I guess, in terms of value in the long run. And then what was the RDNA 2?
Yeah, I mean, RDNA 2, I mean, again, that's kind of... Will it be a Zen 2 moment? It's hard to say. It does kind of feel like the current Radeon products are similar to where Zen 1 was in that they're good, they're competitive, especially as value options and mid-range options, but are lacking that sort of higher-end, really top-end performance competitive part. With Zen 2 on the CPU side, obviously we got those really high-end 16-core, 12-core competitive gaming performance parts. So it does feel like that the next step on the Radeon side is to do basically the same thing and sort of step up and offer something on the high end. So I think it's not necessarily what we should be expecting, but it's kind of what needs to happen. Like, it's not good enough anymore just to have mid-range cards, I don't think.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would actually say that's a fair expectation. I think that's what we should be expecting.
Yeah.
But whether that's wishful thinking, a bit too hopeful, well, yet remains to be seen. But yeah, as you're sort of alluding to, that would be the minimum expectation there. That's sort of what we're wanting to happen. With RDNA 2. They
don't necessarily need to have the fastest card on the market. They don't need to have the outright performance crown, but they need to at least be competing at 2080, 1080 Ti class of performance. So obviously they're going to need to do better than a 2080 with the next generation of cards, but certainly they need to also just be in that class of performance, have a $600 or $700 product that is worth buying and worth spending money on, not just $400 anymore. Because they've been out of that market for too long and they need to get back. And so basically an expectation I think is pretty fair.
This is an interesting question here, Tim. Are liquid coolers a better option than air coolers when working with high ambient temperatures? I would say no, it wouldn't make a difference. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of which way are you angling this question. Is it more based on, do you want lower CPU temperatures or do you want less heat output? But really, either way, outputs the same amount of heat, whether you have an air or liquid cooler. Because the heat output from the CPU is the same.
Yeah, if you're talking 21-degree room or 31-degree room, they both get bumped up by 10-ish degrees.
Yeah.
And one doesn't necessarily fare better than the other, because you're starting with an ambient liquid temperature of 30 degrees or an ambient heatsink temperature of 30 degrees, and you've still got the heatsink temperature anyway with the all-in-one liquid cooler, because that's where you're actually transferring the heat away from the liquid, and the liquid's transferring the heat away from the CPU. So, yeah, I haven't had much time to think about it, but I don't think it makes any difference.
The only reason I could think of maybe leaning more towards the liquid cooler is that...
Depends how much liquid.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the liquid cooler, but I would say that you're more likely to get a quieter system in a high ambient temperature with a liquid cooler than you would be with an air cooler. But then again, there's some pretty good air coolers that are quiet, so...
I think in really uncomfortably hot environments, you probably want the air cooler because you won't get any problems with liquid temperatures.
Yeah, that's possibly true as well. It's another factor to consider.
That's just a random guess I'm throwing out there. I don't know how uncomfortably hot it has to be before that becomes a problem. There's gonna be a whole lot of factors there.
Yeah, I don't think there's any consensus. Yeah.
No. Anyway, somewhat interesting question, I think.
All right, so we've got a question here. Do you know anything from behind the scenes about why companies have such terrible naming schemes? What are the decisions behind it? All the usual candidates like the USB renaming, Intel mobile CPUs, laptops, monitors, so on. Why don't brands just name their products in a regular pattern like USB 3, USB 4, no in-between crap like USB 3, Gen 2x2, or USB 4.1? Look, totally agree with you on the USB stuff, monitors, CPU names, they all need to get better. I think it comes down to, part of it is someone is in control of the names and think this is a really good idea and makes a lot of sense for people. And part of that comes down to, they've got this naming scheme that to them makes a lot of sense because they've got, the first number means this, means the series, the second number means the category, the letter at the end denotes a certain type of product or whatever it is. So they come up with these things that seem, they think they're being really clever and making up those names and makes a lot of sense, but only makes sense to them because they've designed the name. So for regular consumers, it just becomes too hard. A regular consumer shouldn't need a decoding table to figure out what all the numbers and letters mean. So I think that's part of it. Another part of it is that maybe they don't expect the names to actually matter for people. So something like a laptop CPU name, maybe it matters to us when we're interested in what chip we're actually getting, but for a person going to a store, an everyday person just buying a laptop, then we're interested in, is this an Intel Core i7 or an Intel Core i5? They're not interested in the 10.7, 10U, 1065G7 part. That's all just numbers and letters. It's just a jumble. They wouldn't understand any name that was given. So I think that's part of it as well. But certainly for something like USB is ridiculous. They have to fix that. It's terrible.
The USB one's inexcusable. The Intel one is somewhat defensible in the sense that they've got the Core series, the Core i7 as you gave the example, and they obviously don't want to break that branding. They've built that brand up. Well, you can argue about that one, but let's just say they built that brand up and they want to keep using that to sell CPUs, and there has to be some kind of code that follows that to identify the thing as you're talking about. Obviously, it was a lot easier when it was the 2500, the 3570 or whatever it may have been, so on and so forth. And then you get to that point where they've already used those. They can't just recycle them because that causes a whole heap of confusion. So they're kind of in this position where do they change the structure entirely, which may break that branding, or do they just do what they've done? And I think doing what they've done, for most people, it's not a problem because they don't really care if it's a 10100 or a 10600 or whatever. They just want the Core i, whatever it is. So, yeah, there's a few different reasons. But the USB thing, I don't really get that at all. Makes no sense. And they had plenty of options there to make it not terrible. Yeah. And they decided not to.
And I think the branding thing makes less sense as well for monitors in particular because Intel Core branding has obviously been in the market for ages, but is there a monitor brand that's been around for ages? Like Samsung Odyssey, for example, is one that's just come out, but that's just a new fresh one out of nowhere. ASUS uses stuff like TUF and ROG, which are just their sort of standard names they've been using for a while. I don't think there's a lot of brand sort of loyalty to those brands.
Yeah, the thing with monitors is it's such a broad... they're just pumping out monitors non-stop. At least that's what it seems like to me. So coming up with creative or unique names for each monitor, and some of them are like revisions on a monitor with a slight change, and
the
monitor ones are another one that's a bit of a mess, but because they're just releasing so many.
Yeah, I think they just need to go, especially on the high-end products, do sort of what more Samsung and HP have been doing. Like, if you have a high-end product that you really want to sell, it's like your Halo tier product, give it like a cool name like Odyssey. HP uses Omen, and then just like a couple of numbers or letters, like Odyssey 32 or Odyssey 49, Odyssey G7, HP Omen X27. Those names are just easy, that you identify it's a high-end product because it's got Odyssey or Omen in the name, and then you've just got the number that's the size or the format of the monitor. So I think that would make that would make a lot more sense than most other naming schemes. Over time, it's good when companies are consistent with naming. Like LG is very consistent with their monitor names. So over the past 3 years, you can pretty much tell which year and size and everything they come from. But other companies are just all over the place. Like Acer's horrible naming from Acer. It needs a bit of work. I think all that stuff needs a bit of work just to be a bit more obvious to consumers what's going on.
All right, Tim, what happened to Radeon image sharpening? Why does no one compare it to DLSS 2.0?
Yeah, interesting question, because we see this a bit as well on some of the game analysis videos that not just us do, but other channels as well. And that whole story is kind of interesting because the sharpening situation kind of ended once Nvidia copied Radeon image sharpening. So now you basically have both brands doing exactly the same thing. So you've got AMD's Radeon image sharpening, Nvidia's got the same thing in their freestyle filter. So it's kind of, both brands do the same thing. There's no need to compare that. Whereas DLSS does something different. They're reconstructing the image, they're using a fundamentally different technique and now getting different results. The reason why we used to compare DLSS 1.0 with image sharpening techniques was that the image quality of DLSS wasn't very good. So it's kind of looking at, how does DLSS compare to some other ways that you can potentially improve image quality, like, turning down the resolution scale and then doing a bit of sharpening to try and improve things. But now that sort of both Nvidia and AMD can do that sort of thing, it's not really a competition anymore. It's not AMD's offering versus Nvidia's offering, because Nvidia does the same thing. You can still do image sharpening if you want, or even do it on top of DLSS. So I think that's why the discussion has kind of steered away from that comparison at this point. So Radeon image sharpening is a decent technology. We've seen it implemented alongside DLSS in games like Death Stranding as one of the new titles. But I think it's up to AMD now to respond to DLSS. That's kind of where the story is. AMD needs a reconstruction technique that's as good as DLSS to keep that battle going. Otherwise, Nvidia's kind of in position number one at the moment. All right, so we're coming to the end of part one of the Q&A. So I thought I'd spice this up with a few rapid-fire questions. I think we hinted at this at the start of the episode. And there's just a few questions here that probably don't require a long answer. So we'll just get into some really quick ones and go from there. So I'll ask you the first one, Steve. Do you think Ryzen 4000 can finally beat Intel in terms of gaming?
Well, I think it depends, Tim, on the type of...
It's a rapid-fire question. Come on.
All right.
All right, well, since Steve decided not to give a short answer to that first question, we'll give it another try. So here we go, second time on the rapid-fire round.
Steve, I'm ready.
Do you think Ryzen 4000 can finally beat Intel in terms of gaming?
Yes, I think they probably will be able to. Is that good?
Yep.
Did I do it right?
Yep.
All right, cool.
Keep going.
Tim, do you think now is a good time to build a PC, or one should wait for new GPUs and CPUs from AMD and Nvidia to be released this fall?
I think with GPUs, it's probably now's the time to think about waiting. CPUs, probably still buy. Zen 3 seems a fair way off at this point. Steve, for building a cheap office PC, would there be any noticeable difference in the user experience between 8 and 16 gigabytes of RAM?
For basic email, web browsing, probably not, but depends on how many Chrome tabs you open. Tim, do you think Intel will not make their own fabs for their own CPUs?
I think they could probably look to using companies like TSMC in the short term, but I think they'll still keep making their own fabs. Steve, is it possible for Intel to keep making better chips, or will they reach the limits of 14 nanometer?
I think you could argue they reached the limit a while ago. They've made small refinements, but I'd say they're pretty much at the end of the road. Okay, Tim, do you think Zen 3 coming 2020 means Zen 3-based EPYC server CPUs and not consumer Ryzen 4000?
Yeah, interesting question. I think they recently clarified that they do mean consumer client desktop stuff, so I think that one's fairly straightforward. Steve, is Zen 1 still a viable option?
Yes, particularly for productivity type workloads. Tim, is there any difference regarding color and image quality between AMD, Nvidia, and Intel graphics?
So if you have everything configured correctly, like HDMI ranges are all using the same sort of thing, there's no difference. So quality settings the same, yeah, should be no difference.
All right, that is going to do it for part 1 of the July Q&A series. Of course, we'll have a few more throughout the week. It kind of be last week of the month is kind of our Q&A week now, isn't it? Really, it's been like that for a while. And the rapid fire round, that was a whole lot of fun. Interesting way there for Tim to mix up some of the questions. Have we got a rapid fire round for part 2?
Yeah, I think we'll be attempting one of those.
Okay.
We've got 2 different rapid fire rounds. Well, a similar sort of format, but yeah,
exciting.
We'll give it a go twice. So that'll be interesting. Hopefully people enjoy a bit of a shake-up.
Love it. All right, well, I guess we'll wrap this one up. End the video, and then you guys can tune back in probably tomorrow night for part 2.
Yep.
Some more rapid fire, some more answering of questions, all that good stuff. So thank you 20% Club for watching the video all the way to the end without skipping any bits, because that's what you've got to do to be a member of the 20% Club.
No cheating.
And no cheating at all. But anyway, that is going to do it for this one. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
We'll see you again next time.